Welcome to the first of a series of episodes on Qatsyr harvest. This will be followed by another long series on Lakat, gleaning. These two series are based upon the upcoming harvest. They are Shabuah, which is 7 sevens, and then Towrah, which is to herald. And so we're going to begin by presenting what I think is the most important of the 35 books that I have written on your behalf, freely offered at YAHOWAH.com for this particular, moment in time. And it is volume 5 of the Yada Yahowah series. It is entitled Qatsyr Harvest. It will present both the Shabuah and Towrah harvests and gleanings. These are the next two Moed Mikre to be fulfilled. And if you're desirous of being able to leave this planet alive, particularly before all hell breaks loose and we enter the time of Jacob's troubles, this horrible period for Israel that will last 7 years before Yahweh's return, then this is what you need to know. So we're going to talk about what I think is the most pertinent revelation of everything that we have discussed over the past 23 years for you right now. Chapter 1, Shabuah, 7 sevens, enriched and empowered. The fourth Mikre, invitation to be called out and meet, is known by many names. Excuse me, I've been dealing with a scratchy throat this last few weeks, and we are going to work our way through this and come out with a normal voice in the end of this. But this, which is the fourth of 7 Moed Mikre, which are invitations to be called out and meet our Maker. It is known by a variety of names. Shabuah is the name that Yahweh ascribes to it. It is called the Feast of Weeks, of 7 sevens, the promise of the Shabat. Now, it is indicative of a glorious harvest. This is a time for gathering in and celebrating that which is enriching and empowering, enabling and emancipating, especially enlightening. Shabuah is integral to Bikurim, firstborn children, just as Matzah overarches Pesach. These events flow one to the next and to the other. Also called Yomim Chaminsim, 50 days. This is the only Mikre that stands apart. Just as we witness when considering the menorah, Shabuah is that candle in the middle. You look at over my left shoulder, you'll see a stylized menorah, all lit up with colorful flames. That menorah, like all of them, has a center candle, and Shabuah represents the candle in the middle. It follows the 3 spring and precedes the 3 fall Mikre, invitations to be called out and meet. And therefore, its fulfillment was neither in the 80th Yobel year, which would be 4000 Yah, 33 CE on our pagan calendars, nor will it occur during the 120th Yobel year, which is in year 6000 Yah, 2033, upcoming here just 8.5 years from now. And rather than being fulfilled by the Messiah Dode, who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim, the responsibility for the the harvest of Shabuah falls to the king's herald, Yada, the third and final of the three Zeroah. 7 Shabbats is observed 7 weeks after firstborn children. That's on an annual basis. It is even presented in conjunction with it, making the two ingatherings irrevocably linked. And for the longest time, I said something which really still holds true, that Dode fulfilled the first 4 mikre. He actually did in a way. And that without him serving as the Passover lamb and carrying our guilt with him on his nefesh into Sheol on matzah, so that he could be the firstborn of firstborn children, Bokurim, Shavuot is not possible. Shavuot is only possible because of what Yahweh accomplished through Dode on these 3 days. He enabled all of this. As the final of the 3 Zeroahs, I am simply a tour guide, if you will, a conductor, somebody saying, pointing the way and saying, here it is, here's how you participate, here's the timing of it, and what it represents in conjunction with everything else surrounding it. But it is Dode who deserves the credit for making it possible. 7 Shabbats is observed 7 weeks after, as I say, firstborn children. It is presented in conjunction with it, making these 2 ingatherings, because Bokurim is the first of 3 ingatherings. Bokurim is a barley harvest. It's the first crop to be prepared at the beginning of the year. Then Shavuot is of mature standing grain, and that grain is typically depicted as wheat as spring turns into summer. And then we have an olive harvest with Towrah, which is that final gleaning. So Shavuot does not exist without Bokurim. Just as I've said that Bokurim, firstborn children, is the result of Passover and unyeasted bread. Without us becoming immortal and perfect, we can't be adopted into Yahweh's family. So without them, there would be no children to bring home. Further, there is no reason for firstborn children without the benefits of the promise of 7, because it is on Pesach we become immortal. The doorway to life is open. On Matzah, Dode's soul carries our guilt into Sheol to deposit it there, so we are perfected. On Bokurim, we are adopted into the covenant family so long as we have capitalized appropriately on these first 2 Moed Mikre. And this prepares us for this final ingathering so that Yahweh can bring us home. But the timing of him bringing us home is what makes it so interesting. Now, as a result, and also relevant both here and now, the purpose of the Feast of Weeks is to equip us really to be effective witnesses for Father and Son. The Shavuot harvest is nearly upon us, so we must be productive while time permits. That is the reason why this is the series I decided to introduce after we finished that long series on Dode's song, which is the single most important thing I can share with you. And the review of the 89th Mizmor, we finished our series of In the Beginning, and we've even finished our series with a bang, I think, with a mighty crescendo. And the final episode, I think, was the 7th episode of Solving Riddles. So now we are free to pursue a new subject, and that's why I'm bringing this one to you. We don't have a lot more time. I think we have a year and a matter of 4 months until the Shavuot harvest. And we are really extrapolating the timing. As a matter of fact, almost everything that is an insight that I share throughout these presentations, throughout these books behind me, is an extrapolation from the text. And I'm so glad we had that series called Solving Puzzles, because that is the way that we go about making these conclusions. God shares an enormous amount of information. That information, and this, by the way, is Wookiee here for those who don't know, those who have been listening to shows for some time, are of course quite familiar with Wookiee. He likes to participate in these programs. But those who have been listening to these programs recognize that our job right now is to put together the whole picture that God has painted. That's why he calls it solving puzzles, so that we can then share what we learn. And I've been doing this, putting together this particular puzzle for 23 years now. And there are things like this where I'm going to share with you what I think is the timing, but it is deduced from the available evidence. So, for example, Dode told us in the form of Gabriel, transliterated to Gabriel. It's not an angel. Gabriel is identified as a man, and it means a man. Gabor and Gabar are the most capable and qualified, compassionate, and courageous man, and then of God. That particular individual is therefore Dode to David. And so David, excuse me again, Wookiee is tired of being up here on the desk with me. Say goodbye, Wookiee. Okay, bye-bye. Dode to David, as Gaborel, visited with Daniel in Babylon to tell him, actually to tell us, Daniel was only chosen because he could write, to tell us precisely when he would arrive in the second of his 3 lives to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim. And he provided a dating system that we'll review on one of these shows. It's one that I really enjoy because it is so precise. 600 years in advance of his arrival, he told us exactly when he was going to arrive in Jerusalem to serve as the Messiah, to be cut off but not for himself, and fulfill matzah in particular. And when we do the math, we come to matzah in year 4000 Yah, which is 33 CE. And because of that date, then we are able to recognize that being year 4000 Yah, when Dode lived his second of 3 lives. And everything that's important to God is separated by 40 Yobel. A Yobel is the time that all slaves are free, all debts are forgiven, and we return to the land. That there was exactly 40 Yobel between Abraham and Yishak, affirming the covenant relationship on Mount Moriah, where we are expressly told that Yahweh would provide the lamb. Exactly 40 Yobel thereafter, Dode now is back on Moriah serving as the Passover lamb. And when we go 40 Yobel from 33 CE, that's 2,000 years, we end up at 2033. And in 2033 is when the last 3 Moed Mikra are going to be fulfilled: Towrah, Kippurim, and Sukkah. Therefore, the one in the middle, we have to come up with the timing. During that presentation of when he was going to arrive, Dode made it very clear that it would be a 7-year period. And it was during that 7-year period that some very bad things were going to happen surrounding an exceedingly nefarious character. That character is the Torahless one. It's the corporeal manifestation of Hasatan. And so since we know there would be a 7-year period prior to 2033, we can do the math and extrapolate and say, all right, the only one of the Moed Mikra, of the harvest, that stands apart is Shabuah. It therefore would be fulfilled at the beginning of what is now the time of Yaakov's troubles, these 7 years before Yahweh returns. That is the deduction that I made from the available evidence. But I had more going for me to affirm it than just that. For example, in the book of Yeshayah in the 17th chapter, which we will get into in great detail, because it explains everything that is going to happen, exactly how it's going to happen, and when it's going to happen. The great prophet explains that the timing of the Shabuah harvest will be at a time when Israel is thinned at the waist, and that she becomes indefensible. And you tie that with something that Gabriel Dode told to Daniel. He said that a treaty would be ratified with many. That treaty is known as the two-state solution. And it will thin Israel at the waist, where she's only a few miles wide, where 70% of the population live. It'll make Israel indefensible. And Yeshayah, Isaiah tells us that Muslims are going to flood into Israel in unprecedented numbers. So such a tsunami of jihadists that they cannot be stopped. The first phase of this, he says, is concurrent with the Shabuah harvest. So you can do the math. I've done it. I've explained my justifications for coming up with this timing. But that puts us on Towrah, 7 years prior to Dode's return in 2033, which is then a Shabat of May 22nd, 2026. And that is when we should expect America, which Isaiah makes it very clear, giving some 20 aspects and attributes of America to condemn, to indicate that America is the country that finally sells Israel out, which means that, based upon the last election, Donald Trump is going to be the Neville Chamberlain. He's going to trade Israel for a promise of peace for Saudi Arabia to garner a Nobel Prize. But that prize will cost Israel millions of lives. So that is the upcoming path that we are pursuing, so that you know what the timing is and what's going to occur. We are told by both Yeshayah and the prophet Yoel that there will be an attack perpetrated by Muslims that will be somewhere between 100 and 1,000 times greater than what occurred on 10/7 of 23. And it's even interesting that 10/7 of 23 is exactly 10 years to the date of 10/7 and 33, when we will celebrate the final Sukkah and enter the millennial Shabbat on October 7th of 2033, also a Shabbat. So this is our timing. It's important that you know that the prophets indicated that this attack would be so devastating that it will be worse for Israel this entire time of Yaakov's trouble, but that particularly this attack will be more devastating than anything that humankind has ever experienced previously, particularly worse the Jewish people have experienced previously, and that would include the Holocaust. So if you don't want to endure that, if you don't want to be part of that, which I would highly encourage you to make that choice, then you're going to want to listen up so that you know what is required for you to participate in this Shabuah harvest. So the Shabuah harvest is indeed nearly upon us. And so we need to be productive, which is why we're doing this program, while less than 2 years remain. We're talking May 22nd of 2026. This is now February 1st that I'm broadcasting this program in 2025. We must also be focused on Towrah, which means to herald, such that the homecoming on reconciliations, Yom Kippurim, exceeds, or at the very least meets, Yahweh's expectations. That is the purpose of what we're doing here. and you are the beneficiaries. Grotesquely, Christians, after ignoring Passover and unyeasted bread, as well as firstborn children, they had the audacity to claim this one day as their own, albeit under a replacement title, Pentecost. To make foolology work for them, they would have to disregard God's Hebrew nomenclature, promise of the Shabat, and they would have to then upend its purpose, which is a harvest of standing grain. And I can assure you, we're going to detail Peter's and Luke's grotesque perversion of this day, because we must clear away the muck if you're going to appreciate the truth. So, moronically, I call them Twistians, beguiled by Peter's preposterous pronouncements in Acts 2, believed the lamest speech, I think, the lamest speech, well, certainly ever recorded by Christians, having written 5 850-page volumes based on Muhammad's and Allah's words. I can tell you that it wasn't the lamest speech of all time. They win hands down on that account. But nonetheless, for people to carry around a Bible and say this is the inerrant word of God, when, as I will demonstrate, Acts 2 is, it's so stupid it hurts. Yet Christians would have you believe that all of that stupidity led to the birth of their church. Well, it was a lot of stupidity, and it did lead to the birth of their church, so they got that part right. Well, of course, that is in spite of the fact that Peter got literally everything wrong, including his ignorant and illiterate misappropriations of the prophet Yoel. In the process of making a complete arse of himself, or fool, should you be offended my characterization of Saint Peter as an arse, he claimed that the fulfillment of Shavuot under a replacement name 2 millennia prematurely, 1993 years to be exact. And he did so on behalf of some babblers that Yahweh would view as filthy foreigners and foes. The fact is, Christianity has become so pervasive, this fungus has corrupted our culture to the extent that we simply are not prepared to appreciate what Shavuot represents until Peter's poisonous ploy is effectively repudiated. And while I have done so in the 4th volume of Twistianity, which is called Incredible, which means, by the way, not credible, I will do so again as we pursue this review of Qatsyr harvest. I say this largely because Shavuot is essential to the well-being of God's covenant family. And while some will question his judgment in this regard, I have been assigned the responsibility as the final Zeroah of overseeing a productive harvest. There's a lot of people that would like to push me aside and take credit, but that was God's decision. And if you don't like it, go ahead and argue with him. See if he cares. Well, and so if we just get down to reality, based upon what we can glean from the Torah and the prophets, we are anticipating fulfillment of 7 sevens, as I've shared with you. My assessment, and lots of ways to corroborate this, but we'll be on the Shabbat of May 22nd of 2026. This would be the beginning of the time of Yaakov's troubles, a time after God's people are compelled into sacrificing the heart of the land to Islamic terrorists. A state of terror is going to be created such that it's carved out of Israel. The nation will be plunged into an unwinnable war. against Islamic savages. And as we learned on 10/7 of 23, first of all, a year before that attack, I was doing a program on Blog Talk Radio, an audio program, based on something that I had written into one of my books. And I'd come to the realization that Israel was going to be attacked this way, that there would be an aerial bombardment to provide cover, and then jihadists would infiltrate smaller communities and abduct and rape and torture and murder the Jews within those communities, and that the IDF would be ill-prepared to stop them, which is precisely what occurred. And now, having read the prophets, I'm here to tell you that it's going to happen again, that this next time it's going to be between 100 and 1,000 times worse in terms of the number of jihadists, and that the aerial bombardments will also be in the range of 100-fold greater. The aerial bombardments will be mostly of Israel's high population areas. It will overwhelm the Iron Dome, such that it is unable to keep up. In fact, it's just a losing proposition for Israel, because many of the rockets cost hundreds of dollars and the interceptors are $100,000. So it will not be possible for Israel to defend its cities. They'll be ablaze. And because so many more jihadists will infiltrate so many towns and communities, they will not be defensible. And as we found out the last time, the IDF is just not prepared to deal with a jihadi war. Even when the IDF finally went into Gaza a month after the attack, first of all, it took them 12 hours to respond to the attack this day. The Muslims breached the most high-tech security fence in the world. And yet Israel's IDF was inactive for 8 to 12 hours. They didn't get a single Apache gunship airborne. They didn't seal off that border so that those who had been abducted could not be returned or taken back to Gaza. It was a total disgrace by the IDF. Even though I'd predicted this and others had predicted it as well. But this next time, the IDF again will be overwhelmed. The IDF is not set up to wage this kind of war. Should Egypt's Air Force come against them, Jordanian's Air Force, should the Iranian, should militaries come attack them, Israel would prevail. The IDF is that much better than their foes that outnumber them 100 to 1. But then if you look at what Israel did in Gaza on 10/7 of 23, I wrote a very long letter, my open letter to Israel. It's now presented in the first volume of Goddamn Religion. And it's also presented on my Yada Yahowah website. It's also part of a 2-part program in the YAHOWAH blog that I have done within the last month. What I said is that if Israel does go into Gaza, of course they did, that it will be counterproductive. Not only will Israel turn the world against Jews by doing so, but that Israel will end up manufacturing more Islamic terrorists than they kill. And at this point, I've been proven correct. And there's no denying it. That after killing nearly 20,000 jihadists, there are some 60,000 jihadists in Gaza. It wasn't not only impossible, Israel was lashing out at symptoms as opposed to the real cause. The real cause of the problem was Islam. That will continue to be the problem. And so this is what awaits Israel. And this attack will occur within no more than a year to a year and a half of May of 2026. Perhaps as early as June of 2027 would be my best estimate, should we have an accurate rendering of what Dode conveyed to Daniel. So it's important that you listen to what I have to say. I want you to be part of this harvest. The nation will be plunged into an unwinnable war and will become completely indefensible. Orthodox Jews are maybe marginally better than, well, I don't know better than what, but they, I guess, marginally better than Christians who have misappropriated this day to call it the birth of their church. They actually celebrate Shabat, even though there's no V in the Hebrew language. And then the rabbis claim that it marked the time that their oral law was given to the elders, when not only is there no evidence of an oral law ever given to anyone, but the Torah specifically denounces it. There was the written Torah of Moshe, and revelation could well have coincided, and likely did coincide, with Shabuah, because Yahweh likes to foreshadow things that way. But there was definitely no oral law, no Talmud given to anyone. So this, of course, is a rather odd proposition, considering that the Talmud was comprised of rabbinical arguments, and the first of them were written 1,500 years to 2,000 years after Moshe met with Yahweh on Mount Choreb. But hey, facts have never gotten the way of a good faith. Well, it's not overtly stated. It is readily apparent that Yahweh began reciting his Torah guidance to Moshe on Mount Choreb some 7 weeks into the Yatsa Exodus on Shabuah, the promise of the Shabbat. Again, we are extrapolating from the evidence, but that's what Yahweh wants us to do. He's provided a narrative, and we can use that narrative to make informed conclusions. Therefore, the rabbis would get the timing right, but just the wrong book. But then again, to create a veneer of antiquity and authenticity for the religion, rabbis now refer to their Talmud as if it were Torah. That's a ripoff. That's a blatant counterfeit. Sadly, this rendition of replacement foolology has come at the cost of millions of Jewish souls. Also troublesome, the rabbinical position on Shabbat is that the Torah mandates a 7-week counting of the Omer, beginning on the second day of Passover, to be immediately followed by Shabbat. Now, the problem with that is that the rabbis, of course, have turned Passover into a 7-day celebration, when Passover is just the first day of Matzah. Matzah is the feast, and Passover is just the first day of Matzah. So they don't even have that right. And while the counting of the Omer is consistent with Yahweh's Torah instructions relative to the timing, it's telling that religious Jews disdain the Mikra of Matzah to such an extent they do not even acknowledge its existence. All matzah is to them is an ingredient that's part of Passover. When to Yahweh, the whole celebration is matzah, and Passover is just the first day of Chag Matzah, the celebration of matzah. As a matter of fact, Passover without matzah is counterproductive. If you were to celebrate Passover correctly and capitalize on it, you become immortal. But because your guilt hasn't been expunged by celebrating matzah correctly, the fungus of yeast still permeates your soul. Your eternity is spent separated from God, which would mean in Sheol. That's a really poor choice. According to God, as I've shared, Pesach is the first day of matzah, and it is unyeasted bread, which is the most essential day. Therefore, rather than a careless mistake, this life and death struggle between Yahweh and Judaism remains. By failing to acknowledge matzah, religious Jews have eliminated the means to perfection and therefore to salvation. Perfection is one of the conditions of the covenant. You have to walk to Yahweh and be perfected. This occurs on matzah. So while it is Yahweh's intent to remove the guilt of religion during matzah as a result of what his son achieved, carrying our guilt into Sheol, rabbis would rather remove Yahweh from their lives and discredit Dode than accept the truth and live forever. Now, there's another problem with the notion of counting of the Omer. And as we will discover in a moment, when we explore the Torah's teaching on the Mikra invitation, the Omer represent the bundled grain gathered and ready for transport, which is part of Tanufa, the uplifting wave offering of Tamim, of the perfected. They are the beneficiaries of what the Messiah and firstborn of God, Dode, did for us on matzah. Therefore, Jews should not be counting, especially in advance of the fulfillment of Shabuah, because they are not counted among those who appreciate what occurred during Chag Matzah. Had the rabbis dropped the facade of religiosity, they would have taught those willing to listen that the intent is not to number the kernels of grain, the days or the weeks, but instead to be counted among the Omer. The Omer are the children of the covenant who, after walking away from religion, have come to Yahweh as a result of what Dode has done for us on Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim. He removed our guilt and carried it into Sheol, never to be seen again, making us perfect before God. When the truth is so readily available from Yahweh, from the Nabi and Moshe, why are rabbis compelled to replace it with a web of lies? The rabbinical indifference towards Chag Shabuah is evident, and the fact that it is the only feast for which they have not ordained a bevy of laws. Instead, they observe it by doing what Yahweh never requests, with prayers. It's correct. Yahweh never once asks us to pray. The reason is Yahweh would prefer us to listen. To this, they add reciting Kiddush, that is a blessing over wine for satisfaction. They read a Piyut poem, the favorite of which is Adon Olam, Eternal Lord, an ode to Ha-Satan, therefore. Obviously missing the point, they refer to this liturgy as the master of the world and the sovereign of the universe, when the purpose of Shabuah is to elevate us, not God. Nevertheless, the little ditty dates to sometime between the 11th and 14th century CE in Spain. After all, what better way to celebrate the Israeli experience with Yahweh than to have it written by those in the diaspora in the land of the Inquisition, by those who do not know him and who were insistent on erasing his name. As would be expected, there is no mention of Yahweh in the religious prose. Also, the rabbinic master has no second, is without division or ally. This too is strange, considering that Yahweh said that he would not only work with the Malaka, if you will, the spiritual counselor's contribution throughout the Mikre. His insistence is that these days are set apart and that he is forever allied throughout them with his son, the Messiah, and the king, the foremost of the Zeroah, Dod. And to the degree possible, he did this for the benefit of Israel. This was nevertheless a rabbinical swipe at the Christian Trinity. But alas, the rabbis have remained incapable of admitting that they were responsible for the religion that was tormenting them. And it was just the first of 4 Babylonian blunders, because the rabbis, after playing a leading role in the creation of Christianity, did the same with Judaism and Islam, as well as a more recent socialist progressive politic. It's hard to survive when the enemy resides in one mind. These Shabbat rituals rabbis now encourage include consuming dairy products with blintzes during their favorites from a menu of options. As for Yahweh's menu, however, it remains very unappealing to them. And rather than drawing inspiration from the many places in the Torah Wanabi where this harvest is explained, as we will do, the rabbis cite portions of the book of Ruth while decorating their homes and synagogues with greenery, commemorating the role of Astarte, of course, and that also Baal play in their religion. Then, with the aroma of cut evergreens punctuating the air, the devout read their treasured Talmud, Mishnah, or Zohar through the night, a custom that only became popular with the introduction of coffee, of course, by the Ottoman Empire. Further, estranging themselves from Yahweh's intent, the Hasidics observe the Yaritz of Baal Shem Tov, which is particularly un-Torah-like. Baal Shem Tov, the Lord of the Good Name, was the Jewish mystic from Poland who lived in Ukraine, and he is the one who invented Hasidic ultra-Orthodox Judaism in what is now Ukraine during the 18th century. In honor of this dubious distinction, and having forsaken the means to life, it is the death of the Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer that the religious commemorate on this day instead of life with Yahowah. Yahowah therefore sees Hasidic Judaism as repulsive. This misguided mystic is the reason that religious Jews remain mired in time, unable to progress or be productive, remaining parasites in America and in Israel. The Lord of the crappy name, feel free to invent a more fitting moniker should you be offended by calling this scum what he actually represents, can ultimately be blamed for turning 2 centuries of Jews away from Yahowah, for their disgusting mourning clothes, for their black hats, and especially their round spudiks, Polish for saucer, a hat comprised of the fur of a weasel tail. Imagine that, the ass of a rodent. You go, guys. Who could be more religious than that? An ass hat. But enough of such foolish foolology. As has been our pattern, we will contemplate how Yahowah defined this mikra, consider how it should be observed, and then investigate how it will be fulfilled. Along the way, we will consider the reasons behind Yahowah's choice of title, Shabuah, of 7 sevens. Opening the book, transcribed by Moshe, to the heart of the Torah teaching, to Kara, called out, we pick up our reading in conjunction with the presentation of firstborn children. Yahweh says, then you should take this written communication into account on your behalf as the means to contemplate the consequence of wavering or of delaying, of pondering the implications and of being left behind by hesitating and waiting on the Shabbat. From the day that you arrive with the sheath of bundled grain, gathered and ready for transport, Omer, for the uplifting wave offering of the perfected, there will be 7 weeks. Kara called out Leviticus 23:15. Oh, this is delicious. First, Yahweh wanted to make it very clear. There is no stinking oral law. You want to be with me. You want to be part of this ingathering. You want to enter heaven. You need to read the written Torah. I made myself clear. I'm speaking for Yahweh. Disregard the goddamn oral law. It's nothing but rabbinic trash. You want to know Yahweh? Read the written Torah that Yahweh dictated to and spoke through Moshe. Full stop. Then you should take this written communication into account on your behalf as the means to contemplate the consequence of wavering or delaying, of pondering the implications of being left behind by hesitating and waiting. Oh my. On the Shabbat. What have rabbinic Jews done with the Shabbat? They've made it the most torturous, do-nothing day in all of history. Good grief. Didn't I tell you that Shabuah is going to be filled on a Shabbat? I didn't mention yet. Towrah. Both the ingathering and the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah on a, you guessed it, Shabbat. When Dod fulfilled matzah and carried our guilt with him into Sheol, do you think that he violated the Shabbat because it was fulfilled on the Shabbat? Do you ever consider the fact that Shabbat is from a verb and that verbs are actionable? Maybe we have a problem here. What I was saying is, if you want to avoid delaying, not acting, being left behind, hesitating because of religious rules on the Shabbat, the way you avoid that is reading the Torah. The Shabbat is not do-nothing day. Hey, well, it was. It's no longer the Shabbat. The sun has set on this Saturday. But we began this program very close to the time of the setting sun. It is our practice to celebrate our relationship with Yahweh on this day. That is the purpose of this day. And God just said, yeah, if you don't read my Torah, my written Torah, you're going to be left behind on the Shabbat. May I remind you again? When is the Shabuah harvest in 2026? Begins on a Friday evening and it concludes on a Saturday, just as does the Teruah harvest in 2033, just as does the celebration of the millennial Shabbat of Sukkah. Something to think about if you are Jewish. From the day that you arrive with the sheath of bundled grain, gathered and ready for transport, the Omar, for the uplifting wave offering of the perfected. So, grain is one of Yahweh's favorite metaphors. And this grain that is ready for the harvest and is bundled and ready to go would be grain, if it's barley, for Bokurim. It's a barley harvest. Happens very early in the spring because barley actually can be, first of all, it is the first grain to be ready to be harvested, but barley is unlike wheat. You can and should cut barley while it's still green and growing, and then it can mature and dry on the ground. You can't do that with wheat. Wheat has to mature first before it meets the sickle and is harvested. And therefore, you're looking at a May time frame for the wheat harvest, while March and April, which typically is when, well, not typically, it's always when Passover, matzah, and Bokurim would be fulfilled, because we're told that Abib is the first month of the year. Abib is defined by barley being green and still growing, receptive, if you will. And that occurs within the new reflected light on the moon's surface closest to the vernal equinox each year. And so that's how you time these two events, and they're separated by 50 days. So the grain represents the souls that are prepared to be with God. They are perfected, which means that every soul that is part of the Omer has not only had the door to life opened by Dod's sacrifice on Pesach, but was perfected by Dod having carried our guilt with him into Sheol, depositing it there, never to be seen again, so that we are prepared for either the Bokurim or the Shabuah harvest. And he says there will be 7 weeks. So from one to the other, and it's 7 weeks exactly from Bokurim to Shabuah, and it's 7 weeks plus 1 day from Matzah to the celebration of Shabuah. So as I noted previously, I appreciate this pronouncement by referring to the Omar, the bundled grain gathered and ready for transport, and Ta'upah, the uplifting wave offering, is Tamim, perfected. So we find another affirmation of Chag Matzah and the benefits of it. This resolution is one of that the religious have been unable to process during the 3,500 years since this declaration was shared by Moshe. Matzah, which precedes Bokurim, was conceived and fulfilled to remove the political, religious, and cultural guilt of the covenant family. The pervasive fungus that has corrupted the souls of mankind is expunged from those who avail themselves of what Dod, our Messiah, has done for us by carrying our guilt into Sheol. Now, these are the Beni of the Berith, who, after walking away from the corrosive and controlling institutions of man, have walked to Yahweh by way of what Dod has done for us on Pesach and Matzah. By removing our guilt and depositing it in Sheol, never to be seen again, the Zeroah made us perfect before God. It is long past time that God's people, Yehudim, Israelites, come to recognize, accept, and celebrate their Messiah's courage and character, his compassion for his people. Now, the timing was important, as it is throughout the Torah. God asked us to count accurately and reckon 7 weeks from the day after the Shabbat observance of unyeasted bread. This would place the timing 49 days after the wave offering during firstborn children. Now, not any day would do. We are not authorized to change the timing of God's feast to another of our own choosing. Yahweh has established a moed, a eternal witness to the annual appointment. The occasion of this Chag feast is based upon a very well-defined, repetitive pattern. Even if he does not expect much from us, there's always a reason for Yahweh's precision. 7 Shabbats. And this is interesting, of course, because Shabuah is 7 Shabbats. And how many years did I tell you that Shabuah precedes Dod's return in 2033? 7. So 7 Shabbats from the day after the special Shabbat observance of Matzah represents 50 days. Now, this annual pattern of 7 sevens plus 1 is repeated in Yahweh's presentation of the redemptive year called a Yobel by God, but errantly known as a Jubilee. Every 50 years, according to Yahweh's Yobel instructions, all debts must be forgiven. Our debts are forgiven. Actually, our debts no longer exist. They're wiped out, expunged, because Dod took them into Sheol, never to be seen again. So not only are debts gone, but all captives are freed. That's Yahweh's idea. He wants us emancipated. He is the one who removed his children from the tyranny and the abuse of slavery in Mitzrayim. He wants us to be free from religion and from politics, the things that typically enslave humans. And even the land is returned so that it can be shared among the family. It is not a coincidence in purpose or with regard to the timing, but instead is further evidence of Yahweh's plan. All of these important fulfillments occur not only on Yobel years, but on 40 Yobel years. 40 times 50 is 2,000 years. It's exactly 2,000 years from the timing that Adam and Towrah were booted from the garden to the time that Abraham and Yishak formed the dress rehearsal to affirm the covenant so that we could be readmitted. And it was exactly 40 Yobel, or 2,000 years from that date to the time that Dod fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim in 33 CE. And it's exactly 40 Yobel, or 2,000 years from 33 CE to 2033, when Dod will return as king and anoint the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant in accordance with the Torah on Yom Kippurim, the 2nd of October, 6:22 p.m. as the sun sets in Jerusalem, 2033. So this is God's plan. You now know it. You now understand the connections and conclusions that can be made and drawn as a result of this. Now, as we shall soon discover, 7 sevens exist to emphasize all of the truths inherent in the Shabbat, which is why the word appears twice in this opening stanza. This is a time to celebrate what Yahweh has promised and what he has accomplished with his Son on our behalf. Inherent in the timing is the ever-present pattern of man, symbolized by 6, in addition to God, who is one, revealing that Yahweh's intent is for us to be together, 7. So let's be clear. The Shabbat is not do-nothing day. Shabbat is a verb, and it is actionable. And as is the case with the Shabbat of Matzah, this is the day Yahweh and Dod have done their most exemplary work. What are the chances that Yahweh and his beloved son, Dod, our Messiah, are observing the Shabbat incorrectly, and that the rabbis with 1,000 limiting rules are doing it right. Along these lines, Shavuot provides a perspective from which to view the stage upon which the most significant fulfillments of God's plan are unfurled. 7 sevens plus 1 is central to God's provision and his timing. Everything pertinent to our reconciliation not only occurs on Yobel years, also defined as increments of 7 sevens plus 1, but specifically in intervals of 40, which commemorates the completion of a time of testing. Yobel, in other words, every 2,000 years. I'm going to go through this again because repetition is what we use to transfer information from short-term to long-term memory. Once it's filed in the long-term memory, we can make other connections to go from knowing and remembering to understanding. Adam and Chawah's expulsion from Gan Eden occurred in 3968 BCE, year 0. 40 Yobel from that moment takes us to 1968 BCE, which is the time that Abraham and Yishak affirmed their commitment to the covenant with Yahweh on Mount Moriah. This would foreshadow what would occur on Pesach in the exact same location, exactly 40 Yobel later. It would be then that we would witness Father offering his Son on Passover as the Lamb on the Yobel year of 4,000 Yah, which is 33 CE, just as Gabriel Dode explained would occur in his presentation to Daniel in Babylon 600 plus years earlier. At this time, after offering his bashar, his corporal body that speaks volumes to us, on Pesach, Dode would fulfill matzah, during which his nefesh soul carried our guilt into Sheol, depositing it there. The following day, on Bakurim, Dode's nefesh and Yahweh's ruach were reunited, and the Messiah came home. This is God's story. This is how it was fulfilled. This is what they're offering to us. Now, moving forward, 40 Yobel, from the time that Dode fulfilled the first 3 Moed Mikre in 33 CE, brings us to, do the math, 2,000 plus 33 is 2033. 2033 is year 6,000 Yah, because 33 was year 4,000 Yah, because 1968 BCE was year 2,000 Yah, because 3968 was year 0 Yah. Get the picture? In other words, Maimonides lied to you. This is the last Yobel remaining within the lifetimes of those who witnessed Israel's prophetic rebirth as a nation. Therefore, since God is consistent, we should expect the fulfillment of the last 3 Mikre, those being the herald, reconciliations, and shelters, to occur in 2033. This timing reflects on the conclusion of the 6 millennia, 6 days, of man's toil outside the Garden of Eden, followed by a 7th-day celebration where we reflect on our relationship with God back in the garden, beginning on Sukkah. The concluding epoch is known as the Millennial Shabbat, where the earth will be like Eden. As such, one of the primary purposes of 7 sevens is to remind us each year that Yahweh has given us the keys needed to understand the pattern underlying his prophetic schedule. Well, this perspective on timing is valuable. It is not the most relevant aspect of Yahweh's introductory statement regarding 7 Shabbats. More than anything, God wants us to shafar, accurately relate to the fact that without Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, there is no Shavuot, Qatsyr. One thing follows the others. 50 days is one step along the path, not the intersection of spokes on a wheel. The wave offering associated with firstborn children, Bakurim, whereby the newly born spiritual children of God, if you will, are lifted up, is tangibly manifest during 7 Shabbats, as the 2 loaves of bread are raised up to God. And on Shavuot, like Bakurim, souls are enriched. They're empowered by the set-apart spirit. So you get a double enrichment, a double empowerment, another opportunity for enlightenment and emancipation. And of course, all of this enrichment and enlightenment and empowerment and enablement enables God's children to be more effective witnesses and to be also comfortable in his presence. As a result, the Mikra of Shavuot brings these things to those who have accepted the conditions of the covenant while celebrating our relationship with God. And none of this would be possible without the specific benefits conferred through Passover and unyeasted bread, yielding in firstborn children. Collectively, this is a cohesive plan. These days prepare and equip us to enter and to enjoy God's testimony and company. Now, beyond this, there would be a purpose. Or I should say, what would be the purpose or the benefit of being born into Yahweh's covenant family, adopted, if you will, to be immortal and perfected, if we're not going to grow up and live together as an eternity as a helpless and dependent baby doesn't sound all that appealing. So we'll end this as part 1 of our series on the Qatsyr harvest with this statement from Yahweh. Meanwhile, into perpetuity and forevermore. The evidence is provided within the enduring and restoring testimony to contemplate the consequence of wavering and delaying so as to be left behind on the 7th Shabbat. You can explain the written accounting of 50 days. Then, with the renewing and restoring gift of the sacrificial offering, you can approach and present oneself to be near Yahweh. Korah called out Leviticus 23:16. I'm going to start on this, and we'll pick this up again in our second episode. But once again, we're told that this standard by God is eternal, forevermore, into perpetuity. If you want to live forever, this is the way. And the evidence has been conveyed through the restoring witness and by way of God's eternal testimony. And it is for you to contemplate the consequence of delaying, of wavering, of being left behind. I'm here to tell you, it's time to make this choice. It's time to be reacquainted with Yahweh's name, to restore your relationship with your Messiah and the Son of God, your shepherd and king, Dode. It's time to return home by way of the Torah. Stop wavering. Stop with this do-nothing day. Celebrate your relationship with Yahweh. No more wavering, no more delaying, so you won't be left behind on the 7th Shabbat. Again, as a dig against the oral law, Yahweh says you can explain the written accounting of 50 days. Then, with the renewing and restoring gift, Chadash. Chadash is the very term that Yahweh uses when he explains that the covenant with Yehudah and with Yisrael is going to be renewed and restored. That's going to occur on Yom Kippurim when Dod returns and anoints the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. This is why it's called the homecoming and the family reunion. So we're moving towards the renewal and the restoration of the covenant. In this case, we're benefiting from the renewing and restoring gift of the sacrificial offering. The sacrificial offering in this case is Dod serving as the Pesach Gael, and then his sacrifice by being willing to carry our guilt on his soul into Sheol to deposit it there. And all of this is done so that we can approach Yahweh. Powerful statement, isn't it? This is Kara, called out. Leviticus 23:16. And this is where we will recommence in our second episode of Qatsyr Harvest. I thank you for listening. I appreciate you inviting me into your home. May Yahweh bless. This has been the Yahweh blog, and I am your host, Craig Winn.